My grandson called me and said, "We're 40 minutes out with my whole crew, so air out the guest house and stock the fridge." Old timer. He figured he was rolling up on a tired old man's lake house to throw a month-long celebration on my dime. He figured he could treat my property like a rented frat house. But he forgot that before I retired to fix up wooden boats on Lake Murray, I spent 35 years as a claims investigator, the man insurance companies called when they smelled a lie buried under a stack of paperwork. I didn't raise my voice. I just set my phone down, walked to my front porch, and started putting a plan into motion that would turn his celebration into a courtroom nightmare. My name is Marcus Whitfield. I'm 66 years old. If you passed me at the hardware store in Chapin, South Carolina, you'd see a man in a paint-stained ball cap driving a pickup with 200,000 miles on it. You'd think I was stretching a pension to make it to the end of the month. That's exactly what I want you to think. It's certainly what my grandson Tyrell thinks. He sees a worn-out old man who got lucky with a house on the water. He doesn't see the $28 million sitting in trusts. I built one settlement at a time, dollar by dollar, for over 3 decades. I was sitting on my back dock that evening, watching the sun drop behind the pines on the far shore, a glass of sweet tea sweating in my hand. It was the first quiet evening I'd had in weeks. Then my phone buzzed against the dock railing. The name on the screen said Tyrell. My chest didn't tighten from fear. It tightened from the bone-deep tiredness of dealing with a leech who shared my blood. I picked up without saying hello. The voice on the other end was loud, layered over the thump of car speakers and wind rushing through an open window. "Pop, pop," Tyrell shouted. "We're on our way. It's going to be like 12 of us. Get the guest house ready. Stock up on food. We're staying through the end of the month. We'll be there in 40 minutes, so get moving, old-timer." He didn't ask. He didn't say, "How are you doing?" He gave orders like I was staff and he was the boss. I took a slow sip of my tea. 12 people, I repeated, calm as still water. "Yeah," Tyrell laughed. "Me and my boys, we just signed with a label. We're celebrating. My mama told me you got a whole lake house out here. Why you been hiding it from family, Pop? That's selfish. Anyway, open the gate, we need ice for the coolers." My granddaughter Deja, my sweet, soft-hearted girl who never could tell that boy no, must have given him the address. I had bought this property under a family trust, specifically so word wouldn't spread, but I'd made the mistake of mentioning it to her at Sunday dinner 2 weeks back. She'd leaked it without thinking twice, the way she always did when Tyrell pressed her. I looked out over the calm water, watched a heron lift off from the reeds, and understood that my peace was already gone for the evening. I could have told him to turn around, but Tyrell was the kind of young man who fed off conflict. If I said no, he'd show up anyway, bang on the gate, make a spectacle in front of the neighbors, drag Deja into the middle of it. "Understood?" I said. "Gate code is 6612. "Good looking out," Tyrell said. "Crank that AC, we're sweating out here." The line went dead. I didn't panic. Panic is for people without a plan. And I'd been making plans for hard men a lot smarter than my grandson since before he was born. I had 40 minutes. I went inside and looked around my living room. The leather sectional, the framed jazz prints I'd collected over 20 years of estate sales and quiet auctions, the upright piano that had belonged to my late wife. Tyrell and his crew would wreck this place in an hour without thinking twice, the same disrespect he'd shown his own mother since he was 16 years old. I called a number I kept on speed dial. Renata Cole answered on the second ring. Renata wasn't just my attorney. She was a woman who'd spent 20 years suing slumlords and won every single time. "Marcus," she said, "what's burning?" "Tyrell's 40 minutes out," I told her. 12 people. He's forcing a stay at the lake house. There was a pause, then the clatter of a keyboard. "You want the full setup?" she asked. "Commercial liability, trespass language, conversion clause, the works?" "Everything," I said. "He thinks he's crashing at Pop's house. I want to change what kind of ground he's standing on." "Done," Renata said. "Sending the document now. Print it. Make him sign before he gets a single key. And Marcus, get the good bourbon out of that house first." I hung up and moved faster than a 66-year-old man has any business moving. I went to my cellar and pulled 3 bottles of 25-year Pappy Van Winkle and a case of vintage wine I'd been gifted by a grateful client years back. And I carried them down to the boathouse, locking them inside a steel storage cabinet I kept bolted to the floor. In their place, on the kitchen counter, I set out a half-empty bottle of the cheapest bourbon they sell at the gas station, and 3 cases of grocery store beer. I went upstairs, gathered my late wife's jewelry, my laptop, my important files, and locked them inside the master bedroom safe room I'd built years ago after a break-in scare. I ran back down to the printer, where Renata's document was already waiting, titled Guest Use and Liability Agreement. To an untrained eye, it looked like the kind of waiver you'd sign to rent a jet ski. But the truth was buried on page 2, in language a drunk 24-year-old wasn't ever going to bother reading. I laid the single sheet on the entry table beside a cheap ballpoint pen. I heard the engines before I saw the headlights. Gravel popped under tires in my driveway. 3 SUVs, rentals judging by the paper plates, swung in and parked at angles, taking up the whole turnaround, blocking my own truck in. The doors flew open, and the noise spilled out. Young men in fresh sneakers and gold chains, women in cutoff shorts, already loud, already a little drunk. Tyrell stepped out of the lead car, 24 years old, a self-styled music manager who'd signed exactly 1 act to a deal that paid him almost nothing, wearing sunglasses he didn't need after dark. He spotted me on the porch. "Pop, pop," he hollered, clapping his hands twice like he was calling a dog. "Don't just stand there. Come help with these coolers. They're heavy." I walked down the steps. I didn't touch a single cooler. I looked over the group. A couple of them eyed me like I was the hired help. "Where's Deja?" I asked. "She's in the back, feeling carsick or whatever," Tyrell said, waving a hand. "She's soft like that. Grab that duffel, will you?" I walked past him to the last car. Deja sat in the passenger seat, pale, eyes red from crying. When she saw me, her face crumpled. "Pop, Pop," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "He said it was your idea," he said. "You invited everybody." I reached in and squeezed her hand. "It's all right, baby girl. Go on inside, get some water." She nodded and wiped her face. I walked back to the front door, where the group had already started pushing past me toward the house. "Hold on now," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a man who'd spent decades catching grown men in lies. They stopped. Tyrell rolled his eyes. "What now, Pop Pop?" "House rules," I said, pointing at the paper on the table. "Everybody signs in. Insurance requirement, in case anybody slips by the dock and decides to sue me." Tyrell laughed, a bark that got his friends snickering. "Insurance? You're trippin', old man." "Give me that pen." He scrawled his name without reading a word. Didn't even glance at the header. Just wanted the door open so he could start claiming territory. "There," he said, tossing the pen aside. "Happy? Where's the Wi-Fi password? And go get us some towels." I picked the paper up, checked the signature, confirmed it was legible and dated. That was the moment the trap clicked shut. "Keys are in the lock," I said. I picked up my old duffel bag and my tackle box from the hall closet. Tyrell paused, a bottle of the cheap bourbon already in his hand. "Hold up! Where you going?" "Going fishing," I said. "For how long?" he asked, confused. "Who's gonna cook? Who's cleaning up after us?" I walked past him, stepping over a designer suitcase, dropped in the middle of the hallway. "I'm the owner, Tyrell," I said, not looking back. "Not the help." "But we're staying the whole month," he shouted after me. "You can't just leave." "Watch me," I said. Didn't go fishing. I drove 20 minutes down the lake road to the Sail Inn, checked into a corner suite under the trust's name, set my laptop up on the desk, and connected to the security feed. The lake house had cameras in the living room, kitchen, dock, and hallways, not the bedrooms or bathrooms, because I'm not that kind of man, but everywhere else belonged to me. I opened the feed and watched them already starting in. One of Tyrell's friends had climbed onto my coffee table and was shaking up a bottle of champagne. It popped and sprayed foam across my leather sectional. A girl in the kitchen was sweeping cabinet contents onto the floor because she couldn't find a bottle opener. Tyrell stood in the middle of it all, shouting that his pop-pop was a pushover who'd never do a thing about it, that the house was basically his anyway, that his mama was getting power of attorney once I started slipping. I picked up my phone and called Renata. "Documents signed and scanned," I said. "Execute Phase 2. "Confirmed," she replied. Property status just shifted from private residence to short-term commercial rental. Clocks running. What Tyrell hadn't bothered to read was that the paper he signed wasn't a liability waiver at all. It was a short-term commercial lease, rate of $12,000 a night, a penalty of $3,000 per unlisted guest, and an eviction clause that let the landlord, me, remove tenants without notice. The moment terms were violated, full balance due immediately. I watched on the screen as someone dropped a lit cigarette onto my wife's hand-stitched quilt draped over the armchair, a small burn blooming dark against the fabric. I opened a spreadsheet and typed, Item 1, heirloom quilt, replacement value $4,000. The night rolled on, and the damage piled up. A cracked side table, a shattered lamp, wine ground into the hardwood. I watched Deja sitting curled up alone on the porch, swing outside, not drinking, not laughing, looking like a hostage in her own family's celebration. My chest ached watching her. I texted her, "If you want to leave, walk to the end of the driveway. A car will be waiting." I watched her check the message, glance back through the window at Tyrell, doing a keg stand on my kitchen counter, and rise to her feet. He saw her moving toward the door and grabbed her wrist. "Where you think you're going?" he demanded, sweat on his face. "I don't feel good," she said. "I need air." "You're staying!" he snapped, shoving her back toward the couch. "You're supposed to be helping me look good for the label people on the call later. Don't embarrass me." I closed the laptop. I'd seen enough. The financial trap was already in motion, but now it wasn't only about money. I called Renata again. "Change of plans," I said. "We're not waiting out the month. Cut the power. If you cut the power, they might tear the place apart in the dark," she warned. "I don't care about the property anymore," I said. "I want the power cut, the water shut, and I want code enforcement called first thing in the morning." "You want to SWAT your own house?" she asked. "No," I said. "I want to save my granddaughter, and then I want to burn his whole world down around him." 5 minutes after the power dropped, my phone rang. "Pop, pop, the lights just died. The AC's off. It's like 90 degrees in here." "Fix it," Tyrell barked. I leaned back in my hotel chair and let a slow smile spread. "Afraid that's a feature, not a malfunction," I said. "The commercial lease you signed has an energy cap built in. You blew right past it." "What lease?" "I didn't sign no lease." "You signed a document at the door," I said. "Restoring power runs a service fee." "How much?" $400. "You out your mind, old man." "Then I suggest cracking a window," I said, and hung up. Around midnight, after the heat had done its work, and his friends were fanning themselves with magazines, Tyrell sent the money through an app, cursing the whole time. I clicked the power back on and let the cool air return, knowing his cash reserves were already bleeding from rented SUVs and gas station bourbon he thought was top shelf. I opened the spreadsheet again, added the LiPass Lang item, then opened a new column labeled Emotional Damages, and thought about every time I'd quietly paid off a debt for that boy so his mother wouldn't have to know, every time he'd mocked my old truck at family cookouts, every time he'd called me washed up in front of his cousins. Morning broke hot and heavy over the lake, my driveway littered with crushed cans and tire tracks where someone had done donuts across my freshly seeded grass at 3 a.m. I sent Renata a single text, green light. She arrived 20 minutes later in a beige polo and a laminated badge, carrying a clipboard, looking every bit the part of a county code enforcement officer who'd ruined 1,000 good afternoons. She knocked sharp and steady. It took 3 minutes for the door to open. Tyrell stood there in boxers, hair a mess, eyes bloodshot. "Who is you?" he barked. "Renata Cole, Senior Compliance Officer, Lexington County Code Enforcement," she said flatly. "We've received multiple citations on this property." Noise after 10 p.m. Occupancy violations. Unauthorized commercial activity. Tyrell laughed in her face, stepped out onto the porch, puffed his chest up the way he did when he wanted to look bigger than he was. "This is my Pop-Pop's house. We're just chilling. You need to leave." According to the lease filed 48 hours ago, this is a commercial venue, Renata said, holding up the paper. I need to inspect the fire extinguishers. Tyrell shoved her, hard, 2 hands to the chest. She stumbled back, dropped her clipboard. I'd told her to expect it, told her to make sure her body cam was running. She straightened her glasses, tapped the small black square, clipped to her collar. That's assault on a code enforcement officer, on camera, she said, voice dropping cold. 3rd-degree felony. Tyrell froze for half a second. Then the arrogance crawled right back in. You're faking that. Get off my property before I really hurt you. She placed the pink citation slip gently on the porch railing, turned, and walked back to her car without another word. That afternoon, after watching Tyrell brag to his friends about how he'd handled the inspector, after watching him put his hands on Deja a second time when she tried calling her mother, I sent her a text. We need to talk. Meet me at the marina in 1 hour. Come alone or don't come at all. She called me crying within the hour, telling me everything. That the label deal was fake, that Tyrell had brought his friends out here to film content, claiming he owned a lake property to impress investors who didn't exist, that he'd told her if she didn't help him sell the lie, he'd leave her stranded with their unpaid lease back home. I told her she had 2 choices: stay and risk being named alongside him when the law came down, or walk to the end of the driveway in 5 minutes and never look back. I drove. I didn't know if she'd come. Then I saw her in my mirror, dragging a suitcase down the gravel, alone, hair a mess, not looking back at the house once. We drove to the hotel in silence. I deleted her access from the security system, stripping away the last thread connecting Tyrell to anything resembling family protection. That night, I drafted an invoice on the same software I'd used for 35 years to total out fraudulent claims. 12 nights, commercial rental, at $12,000 a night, unregistered guest penalties, biohazard cleaning fees, provisional damages, the number at the bottom reading $142,000, due immediately. I sent it. 10 minutes later, my phone rang, Tyrell screaming that I'd lost my mind, that the dementia was setting in, that he wasn't paying a cent. And then, when I mentioned the gambling debt I knew he'd been hiding from his mother, his voice dropped into something uglier. You push me, old man, I'll make sure you never see your great-grandkids again. Deja does what I tell her to do. I went cold and quiet. My granddaughter sat across from me at that moment, eating ice cream for breakfast for the first time in years without anybody telling her she shouldn't. And I looked at her and knew the leash he thought he still held had already been cut clean through. The next morning, I signed a quitclaim deed, transferring the lake house to a holding company I controlled, paid myself $1 for it, and had Renata call the sheriff's department, not as a family dispute, but as a corporate trespass with 6 figures in damages and reports of narcotics on the premises. The cruisers rolled in without sirens, lights only, boxing in the rental cars. Deputies moved in formation toward the front door, while Tyrell stood inside, bragging to his remaining friends that the old man was bluffing, that he had texts proving he'd been invited, that nobody could touch him. When the deputy read him, the deed showing the property now belonged to a corporation, Tyrell's face went slack. That's a shell company. That's the same as him owning it? He stammered. It's a commercial asset, sir, and you're trespassing on it. The deputy answered, flipping to the lease with Tyrell's own signature at the bottom. He lunged for the papers in desperation. That was enough. They cuffed him on the hood of the cruiser, while his friends, the same ones he'd promised free villa access to in exchange for $2,000 each toward his fake fund, turned on him in real time, pulling out screenshots, Venmo receipts, group chats, where he'd promised them premium access and party favors included. I bailed him out the next afternoon, not out of mercy, but because you can't serve a man divorce papers and a $250,000 civil suit while he's sitting in a holding cell. He ran toward me when the doors opened, expecting a hug. I stepped back and handed him a thick envelope instead. Petition for separation, civil suit for damages. And the final blow, the news that I'd quietly bought the note on his mother's condo years ago when I'd co-signed to help her refinance, that I now held that debt, and that he had 30 days to make this right or watch his own mother lose her home over his arrogance. His brokerage license, the fake fund, all of it collapsed within the week. His name dragged through small claims court by a dozen people demanding their $2,000 back. His social media flooded with strangers, calling him a fraud. I bought up what remained of his debt for pennies on the dollar through a separate company, becoming his largest creditor without him even realizing it, owning every dollar he'd ever owe for the rest of his working life. It took 3 weeks to restore the lake house, the quilt rewoven by a specialist in Charleston, the floors resanded, the piano retuned. I sat on my dock one morning as the sun came up gold over the water, and Deja walked out behind me in an oversized t-shirt, no makeup, carrying 2 cups of coffee, looking lighter than I'd seen her look in years. She handed me a cup and sat down without saying a word, just watching the water with me. My phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. Pop, please, I got nowhere to go, just $50, I'll sign anything. I looked at it for a long moment, felt nothing where anger used to live, and blocked the number. I took a sip of coffee. It was smooth. The water was calm. The house was clean. My granddaughter was safe. Tell me where you're tuning in from today, family. And if you've ever had to teach somebody close to you a hard lesson about respect, let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe so I can keep bringing you these stories. I'll see you in the next one. Family isn't something you owe quiet loyalty to, no matter how it treats you. Real love sets boundaries, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is stop shielding them from the truth. Marcus didn't lose a grandson that summer. He found his granddaughter again, the one who'd been disappearing a little more every year. Sometimes the bravest love looks like walking away from who's hurting you. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to carry a genuine, positive life lesson to you.